Welcome to Nomadic Diaries. This is the Belonging Project. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Ruth Van Reken. Now, Ruth is the leading expert on third culture kids and the challenges of growing up across borders and between cultures. Her groundbreaking work, Third Culture Kids, Growing Up Among Worlds, really explores how children who spend their formative years outside their passport countries develop unique identities and perspectives. So through her research and writing, she has helped thousands, possibly millions, of third culture kids and their families to understand the complexities of cross-cultural identity and belonging. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Doreen, and thank you, Megan, for having me. It's a privilege to be here. I'm always happy to talk about this topic.
Welcome, Ruth. Yes, what an honor to have you on the Belonging Project series. And as Doreen mentioned, you co-authored the book, Growing Up Among Worlds, Third Culture Kids. It's on its third edition. And what I understand, it's now in process with the fourth edition. And we would love to hear from you. What was the process like for gathering stories, gathering concepts, reworking concepts? I mean, we could have a whole podcast on that, I'm sure, about book writing. But what is something, maybe a highlight for you in creating a source that I think, Doreen is super accurate, has been in the hands of millions of people?
Thank you for that. I don't know the numbers, but it has certainly been an amazing gift in my life to be involved in this topic. It happened without my plan. I was born and raised in Nigeria as a third culture kid before I knew there was language. My father was born and raised in Resht, Iran, which was then Persia. And I raised my kids in West Africa and Liberia. So all of that without knowing there was language. I loved my life. I thought my kids loved their life. My father loved his. But there was this thing in me that could never understand my story because with all the wonderful things about it, there were these places that just had like a silent depression or anxiety or just something that I couldn't understand because I didn't have a reason. I had this perfect life, and yet there was something that was there. So when I was 39, I decided I needed to journal and just to see if I could touch whatever it was. And I began to understand that it was the very goodness of my life that gave me grief when I lost the world I loved and when I left Nigeria as a child. And I began to understand that because it had felt to me like if I ever talked about the hard things, I would be disowning the good things. I kind of pushed those aside. So that was an exploration of that. And one day I got a survey to fill for a conference that Dave Pollock was having. Dave had picked up the term third culture kids from Ruth who was the one who originated it in the 50s when she was studying American families in India. And it was supposed to be a survey for me to fill out for my children. We lived in Liberia then. So I wrote it back in, and they wanted to know about my educational opportunities for the kids. And it was going to be a conference on TCKs, specifically MKs, missionary kids. I wrote it and I said, what are you doing for the adults? I'm 39. Nobody ever did any of these conferences for me. I just found out that's even a name. And so I'll send you my stuff if you are interested, and maybe I'm the only one. So I sent it, and he said, no, you're not the only one. And somehow he invited me to the conference. And that was how I met Dave Pollock and began to have all these wonderful conversations with him. And one day I said, Dave, you've really got to write your stuff up because I'm starting to see you be quoted in New York Times and all these papers, just little quotes, but they might have one quote from him and then they talk about it, but I knew they had to have gone to his seminar. I said, if you don't write it soon, you're going to have to quote the people quoting you. And he said, well, I don't have time. And I said, well, I'll help you. I mean, how hard could it be? He had developed the third culture kid profile, and he developed the transition experience. And I thought, piece of cake, I'll write it up. And I was working as a nurse then, so I took a 3-month leave of absence, and I never went back because it took me 6 years. Because exactly what you're saying, I just started to ask people questions, and I started to listen to the stories. And in a way, all the stories were the same, except they all had different details. But I thought, no, this isn't just my story. This is a really big story. And so that was how I got involved in writing. And then when we sent it into the publisher, the only publishers that would take it were Intercultural Press. All the other people said, it's not that big a deal. Who cares? Nobody's doing it. That way, you really don't know, but that's okay. We'll take what we get. That's always the idea. Take any opportunity you can and see what happens. So Intercultural Press accepted it. But when I sent in the first manuscript, they said, you can't just describe it. You have to explain it. I thought, well, heavenly days, who knows? It just happens. So that became the next part, because when I was a child, they called me the but why auntie kid, meaning everything somebody said, I said, but why auntie, why? Because we called all the adults aunties and uncles. So that became kind of fun. It was this huge puzzle of why is it that we have delayed adolescence? Why is it that we have this both and? And, David developed the characteristics, but the question was why. So for me, that was fun and became interesting. It took forever, but finally it came out in 1999, the first edition. Then the world kept changing and growing. And as that edition came out, other people said, well, I didn't do it that way, but I relate to it. And they all had a cross-cultural piece. So I thought, well, what is it about growing up cross-culturally just by itself, besides the mobility part that changes people? And so we added cross-cultural kids, and then that was the second edition. And then by the third edition, the publisher said we were on our third publisher then, I think. They kept buying each other off. And they said, you really should. Dave Pollock had died in 2004. So the second edition I did myself. And then we invited Michael Pollock to do the third one. And now we have a four author one coming with Cynthia Green, who actually helped me way at the beginning understand more about the ongoing larger picture of being a corporate kid, and helped me shape some of the stories. And so it's kind of been fun coming full circle back to working with her again. And we're hoping we can take the lessons we've learned from the TCK experience and apply them, of course, for TCKs, but also in an enlarging world and a growing cultural complexity of our world. What have we learned that maybe other people can learn from as well? And one other thing I'll just say about the reason for enlarging it, so many third culture kids now are not like I was. I grew up in Nigeria, back to the States to Nigeria. I was between two countries. I spoke English at school. I spoke English at home. I spoke English on my return. And for so many kids who are TCKs now, there are layers of complexity that I never knew. So it's a changing world. We're trying to keep up with it. And it's given me great joy. I've met all kinds of wonderful people like you too. And it's been fun most days.
Yeah, Ruth, that's an incredible journey. Thank you for sharing those details. And it's really your life story that's become a message of your life story. And I really appreciate that you coined the term cross-cultural kid, and what you're saying is enlarging the inclusivity of stories. And so I think that's an incredible achievement, and is bringing a lot of normalizing to people's lives when there can be isolation and loneliness. And so I think cross-cultural kid is a belonging term.
Thank you. That's what it was meant to be. There was so much discussion. Well, are you a TCK? Aren't you a TCK? And I thought, but nobody's talking about the issue. Why are people connecting to the story if they didn't do it that way? There's something that we share that is bigger than just one story. I liken it to a petri dish where when Alexander Fleming, by accident, found out that when he left mold in his petri dish, there was no bacteria that grew there. And that was the beginning of antibiotics. But first, you have to study the petri dish to find out what's there, and then you can apply it to other places. And that's kind of been the fun for me of trying to think through and what are these pieces, and it keeps growing and people keep adding to my life and my understanding, and I appreciate that so much. There's a lot of smart people in this world, you know.
Yes.
Teach you lots.
But my experience here in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico is one of where we're not surrounded by TCKs, but there are many, many TCKs and more moving here all the time. And they're not familiar with any of this language. So there's still so far to go in terms of reaching and companioning and getting alongside people. Do you find that gives you inspiration to carry on, Ruth?
Yes, because it drives me crazy that there's so much we know and so many people who should know it that don't know it. And particularly people who are in positions like educators and counselors and even CEOs who could use the gifts of the people that they have in front of them.
Yes.
And the hardest place for me to do this is right here in Indianapolis, where I live, because so many people didn't grow up cross-culturally, and we have this influx of kids from around the world that are going to our schools, and they don't understand the ramifications for these kids. So I think my passion really is when I hear people's stories and I hear the sad parts, and there's a lot of sad parts, kids that just shouldn't have been wounded, that didn't have to be shamed, because so much of it, when you move cross-culturally, this is kind of a new awareness. I'm realizing the shame that comes. I didn't put a word on it before, but when you go, and I came back to the States when I was 13, and I thought I was an American, like, you know, countless TCKs do, think they're wherever they're from. And I didn't know anything. And I knew the kids were laughing at me behind my back, because it wasn't totally behind my back, you know, it was kind of snicker. And the shame I felt, like, what is the matter with me? Something's wrong with me. Everybody else figures out the rules. I don't know what they are. So it can't be them, it's me. And of course, I had no language, I had no understanding. And that's the thing, that when I see people coming back and not belonging, when you don't belong, you do feel shame. What is the problem? And so you use a good word, Megan, about normalizing. I think if we could normalize this experience so people understand it and help our kids understand it. I've seen such good things when these schools teach transition programs, they teach kids about this. The kids can own it. They can stand up and say, okay, I'm the many, I'm all of it. Instead of, well, what's the matter with me? I'm none of it. Because if I have to be 100% something and I'm not 100% and I'm not 100% this, then something's the matter with me, if we look at it in old ways of belonging. And so that is what pushes me on, because I can't tell you the stories I've heard that make me cry, literally. And they didn't have to happen. If people knew, if people understood, they didn't have to happen. So that's one thing that it does drive me. But it's why I appreciate people like you doing podcasts and getting the word out. You know, I can't possibly get it out by myself. Neither could Dave Pollock. Neither could Ruth Useem. Neither could Norman McCaig, who also began Global Nomads. It's a massive undertaking that needs everybody who understands to tell the next person. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And you are just, the work itself is inspiring. You are inspiring. And you must have been working at this for 4 decades now, because you just recently had your 80th birthday. Belated happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Shocked to be this old, but I'm grateful that I made it.
Yes. Well, congratulations on your 80th birthday. And for
Thank you.
Megan being the party planner of the
She
century
was.
and
Thank
putting
you.
together this great experience of you could be a belonging party planner, Megan.
Good.
There are ideas bubbling.
Excellent. I'm glad to
Well,
hear.
she's a good one.
Yes,
And
Thank you,
she's a
Ruth.
keeper.
It was
one of the highlights of the evening was realizing how much of two separate worlds I live in. I live in my family world and my Indianapolis world, and I
Yes.
live, when I used to travel more, but the families and global transition world, which is where I've met all of you. And that night they all came together, and I thought, what an incredible life I've had.
Yes, yes. So much to be grateful for. I can understand that. And I can understand the language you're using when you're talking about your family life and your situated life, but you also have this amazing global life. And I think when we in our elderly years as retirees decided to move to Mexico, it was time to sew those lives together. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do this, because it would be very hard to live only one of those lives now that we know that we have both of them available, right, Ruth?
Absolutely. And they're both special and important, and both places we could belong. And I do
Exactly.
belong. I feel
Exactly.
very strongly at belonging in both. And so it's been a gift. And I think the other thing that's a surprise I'll just throw out for what it's worth, is the part of my life that seems to have been used the most was the part I was the most ashamed of before. It was the part I kept hidden, the part I couldn't tell anybody because I thought I was the only one. And I guess the surprise for me is that when we share the things that are secret in those places that we think nobody feels like this, that's when people put their hand up or come on the side and say, but I do. I had no idea anybody else felt like this. When my first book, Letters Never Sent, came out, which was the journaling that I had done, I start with my first night in boarding school when I'm 6, and I'm crying in my bed for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many people wrote me and said, I thought I was the only one who cried when the lights were out. And I thought, why didn't we all get together and cry together? But all of us were in secret, hiding
Yes.
our shame that we were such crybabies, because that was the one thing you didn't want to be at school, was to be a crybaby. And now we found out we were all crybabies, except we didn't know it. So it's been part of the journey to realize how much we all hide thinking we're alone. And if we share them, we might find out there's a lot of people we belong to too.
Absolutely. And it's healing, isn't it? I think
Yes.
the expressing the feelings, the experiences, the behavior has a very natural therapeutic effect, so that we don't have to do as much counseling if we actually do tell our stories.
I think there's no question.
Yeah.
Every person that tells me their story comforts me in a way,
Yes.
because it's one more person.
Yeah.
I'm not alone,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like having
Validates
a
the story.
podcast, all these
Yeah.
stories. It's delightful. That's my favorite part of it, is all these people who are amazing brilliance, and their stories are terrific. Megan, you want to go ahead with that first question about third culture kids?
I mean, it's a big one, and
Oh, it's a
can
bit
unpack
vague.
it. Yeah, it's kind of, I think, an umbrella question of what does belonging mean for third culture kids who have lived in multiple worlds?
Hmm.
Well, I think the first question is, what does it mean to what are we talking about? Who are we talking about when we talk about belonging?
Yeah.
I think one of our problems is that historically, there's sort of this feeling like, well, I have to belong to a certain country or I have to belong to a certain group. And part of the reality for us is we belong more experientially to each other and to other things. But the first thing for me when I first journaled, and I heard from Dave Pollock, he sent me a letter from a therapist. He had asked, what are the things that TCKs, that you deal with the most with TCKs? And she said, a lack of an awareness of personhood, which I didn't know what that meant, and a lack of comfort. Well, at the time, I was doing all this writing, and I picked up on the word comfort because I thought I was encouraged to death. Everybody said, oh, it's going to be here, and it's going to be, and, like I said, I had all these good things. But nobody, like if I'm missing my mother at boarding school, just picks you up and holds you because they try to encourage you with something good's going to happen. But later I started looking at what it meant to be a person. And I thought about the first thing is we're relational beings. So no wonder we need to belong, right? We're not crazy because we need to belong. But we also need somebody to know our story. And you need to know theirs. Well, if you keep switching communities and stories, and you have a story that you think other people don't understand, then sometimes we think we can't tell it because they look at us like, what's your problem, or you're bragging. So at least for me, I stopped telling it because it sounded like I was being, proud or something that I'd lived in Africa. So in high school, I didn't tell anybody that I had been from there. So I could belong in a different way. There's different kinds of belonging. I belong to my group, from church, and I belong to my high school friends. But part of the issue is that we belong in different ways in different places, but that's probably normal for everybody. And maybe that's accepting. So I think as I've gone through life, there's one place. When we came back, we lived in Liberia for 9 years. We came back and I went through the usual reentry and that sense of not belonging because I didn't share the same interest, I guess. I was at a luncheon and they talked for 45 minutes about their curtains. And I thought, I really don't have that much to think about my curtains. They're still the curtains I had when I bought the house because I don't know what you do with curtains. And but then we went back to Kenya, and the first night I was there, people were talking about what they did and where they'd been, and nobody was bragging, but they had all these what would be very esoteric jobs if you were in Indiana. And I thought, I understand this world. It is a world I belong to. I don't know the people, but I know this experience. I belong here. And that was a revelatory moment. And for some reason, then when I came back to Indiana after that year, I realized I don't know what my neighbor does either. He goes to Lucent Technology as an engineer. I have no clue what he does. But we can be neighbors. We can belong in our neighborhood. We can belong in our friendship. But I don't have to expect him to know my whole life, and I don't have to know his whole life. And I guess I began to understand that belonging was for me more of an internal thing. First, I need relationships because I'm a human. And I can belong humanly to other people because we both share that. My neighbor wants relationships. We also have feelings. And for a long time, when letters came out, people said, well, if you hadn't been so emotional, you would have been fine. So now I get to be ashamed that I'm an emotional person. And I thought, wait a minute. That's part of being human. I don't have to be ashamed that it's hard for me when I switch, or that I love, other places. And then, there was so many things about being human, that being creative and being that we can think, and that we all need a sense of significance. And I realized a couple of things. First, about my own story, if I was creative, and I always thought I wasn't, that is it okay to create with ideas, even if you can't do anything with your hands? Like Megan, you're wonderful at creating beautiful things, and I'm hopeless at that. But can I accept, who I am in the way that I'm human? But then I can look for that in other people. They don't even have to be TCKs. One problem TCKs have, I think, is thinking they can only belong to fellow TCKs. I've heard so many say, if you're not a TCK, you can't understand me. That's not true. You're a human being. I've had my experience of being a TCK. So I've had my losses, I've had my gains, I've had all these things in that experience. But the human likeness transcends experience. So even if I meet somebody who's selling bananas in the market in Liberia, she's still a human being. And when I buy my bananas from her, if I tell her those are good bananas, she's going to feel good because she wants to be important. She wants to have significance. And so I think when I really began to think, what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
I've thought there's a lot of places I belong, and I belong in different places. But of course, we all start with our family, we hope. And of course, that isn't the so for everybody. But anyway, for me, as a TCK, I have, and maybe it's just because I'm old, but I have so many places that I say I feel like I belong. And it can be different ways and different reasons and for different parts of my life. But it's enough. It's not just enough, it's good.
Yes.
And it's good. It's really good. And I may
Is
not
there a
belong to a
downside to,
place. Huh?
sorry, is there sometimes a downside to that? Because I know when we were traveling after we retired, everywhere we went, I would say to my husband, I could belong here. And he found that extremely frustrating. Because it was like there was, we can live in the stratosphere of, oh yeah, I could be this because I'm adaptable, I'm a good chameleon. I could be this. But what that does is it just keeps us living sort of in the topsoil of of our life and not sort of deeper down. And so I think that's a two-edged sword, isn't it? The fact that we have these skills.
I think, yes, but I also think you're talking about you could belong here. There's a part of me that actually I feel at home here in Indianapolis, but I have a few deep connections, but I also had to accept that my belonging could be global
Yes.
and not just in one place. I think that was for me, the idea that you have to belong to a place was part of my transformation when we came back to the States. And at first I thought, oh, I'm never going to fit here. I don't think being a suburban housewife's going to make it for me. But I found out relationally, I could stay connected. I could be part of my other life. And then I could have friends here, but I'm probably never going to be high on the social scene here because I had to accept my life was in a different sense being lived. I mean, I have my family and things, but that it was okay to be here and to be here and have friends, but that many of my deeper connections are like with you guys on Zoom and around the world, and that there's a different way to define belonging for
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
That was a change too.
So it's this and yes, it's our global belonging and our local belonging. Yeah. And sewing
I'll
those
give you
together,
my
finding
one
a
thing
good
that
balance.
my father said, you can throw this in wherever you want. But because I think of it as being a TCK, I've said this many times, but he said, wherever you are, he said, unpack your bag and plant your trees because otherwise you'll never live. And he said, you can live fully in any place you are if you have that mindset to be there. But belonging is more than just the place, but you can find that contentment in where you are if you live it fully.